Brooks will lead us in the pledge?
Sure. Would you join me in pledge allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take the roll, please.
Mayers?
Here.
Benefield?
Here.
Brooks?
Here.
Griswold? Gould? Here. Hart? Here. Ogalla? Here. Parker? Here. Staley Ferry? Here. Tumanello? Here. Weigel? Here. Winthrop? Here. And Eustace?
Here.
You have a point.
And next item is the executive committee minutes from August 10th.
So moved. Second.
Move second. And if there are any additions or corrections, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Do we have executive session minutes of the executive committee from August 10th?
Moved.
Second. If there are any additions or corrections, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Is there any other old business to bring forward today? Okay, then moving on to new business. Update from Swiss, Dawson, and Andrew. You know, Brett, you can come down by the podium, or you can present from the desk if you like.
Whichever you prefer.
Why don't you come on down? People like to see you.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Mr. Speaker, members of the County Board, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here this morning. We have always valued our partnership with Will County and are very proud of our collective accomplishments over the last several years. I thought I would take a few minutes this morning. I know you have a busy agenda, but I wanted to update you on the current session of the 115th Congress, what has transpired to date, and what we see coming down the pipe for the next 3 months of the final quarter of the year. And then Brett is going to talk a little bit about our specific Will County federal agenda and our priorities and some of the activities that we have undertaken on your behalf over the last 8 months. As you know, Congress was in recess for the month of August. They came back right after Labor Day. Everyone was anticipating a very contentious September with a fight over continuing funding for the federal budget after September 30th and increasing the federal debt ceiling. But that, much to our surprise, and I should say pleasant surprise, the White House and the Congress came together quickly last week and agreed to terms on a short-term continuing resolution which continues funding for the federal government after September 30th through December 8th. And the good news is that funding levels will be at current fiscal 17 levels, which means that programs that are so important to the county like CDBG and federal qualified health care centers and others will continue at the same level of funding at least for the next 3 months. At the same time, they agreed to a short-term extension of the federal borrowing debt ceiling. That was good because otherwise we would have defaulted, as a country, would have defaulted on our obligations, and that would have had ramifications all around the world. But now the hard work really begins. Now that they've gotten past this temporary crisis, they have a lot of work left to do. For one thing, they still have to deal with the budget for the balance of federal fiscal year 18. They still have to deal with the debt ceiling because the debt ceiling was only extended to December, and Treasury has indicated that with some extraordinary measures, they may be able to stretch that out into the spring, but nonetheless, there will be another extension required. They still have to deal with all 12 federal appropriations bills. So by not doing the budget and passing appropriations bills by September 30th, they're forced to do the CR, and now they've got to come back and either do 12 individual appropriations bills, or more than likely, like they've done many years in the past, they'll compile them all into one big omnibus spending bill and pass that to fund the government through September 30th, 2018. There are a number of other must-do items that Congress has to deal with. This is all before September 30th. They have to extend the Children's Health Insurance Program, which expires on September 30th. They have to extend the FAA authorization bill, which funds all of FAA's operations and air traffic control. That expires on September 30th. They have to extend the federal flood insurance program. These are must-do items before the end of the year. Now, what is the likelihood that they'll do that? Not very good. Much like they dealt with the budget appropriations, they're probably going to do short-term extensions on the FAA bill, short-term extension on children's health insurance, and a short-term extension on the flood control bill. But at the same time, both the congressional leadership and the White House have said, before the end of the year, we're going to do comprehensive tax reform. We're still going to deal with the Affordable Care Act, try to do either a repeal or replacement or modifications to the ACA. There still is infrastructure, which there's been a great deal of discussion, but very few details released to date. And then at the same time, the President has given Congress a 6-month deadline to deal with DACA, the Children's Immigration Authorization Program. So there is a very full agenda over the next 3 months. And it remains to be seen whether or not Congress can accomplish all this. I will say that it was encouraging last week to see some bipartisan cooperation finally when both the Republicans in the White House and Democratic leadership came together on a continuing resolution and on extending the deadline. If that is we don't know if this is just a one-time incident or whether or not this is going to be a pattern for moving forward. I think if it is a pattern for moving forward, I think that there is a lot of optimism for accomplishing these things like tax reform and infrastructure and health care. But only time will tell. I think that right away, the first thing that they have to do is deal with the budget. And in dealing with the budget, they also have to pass what's known as a budget reconciliation clause, which will give them the authority, give Congress, and particularly the Senate, if they can pass a budget reconciliation bill with instructions for doing comprehensive tax reform, that would give the Senate the ability to pass a comprehensive tax reform with only 50 votes. As you know, the Senate operates under a 60 supermajority rule. This would essentially suspend that rule and give them the ability to pass a tax bill with 50 votes. That's what they did do with health care reform, even though they were not successful. They did it under budget reconciliation. So there's a lot on the calendar. Obviously, these issues impact the county, both from a budget and appropriations standpoint. I should mention that a lot of the appropriations bills that have moved through the House make drastic reductions in spending levels for many of the domestic discretionary programs important to the county. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye on very closely. Tax reform obviously has implications for the county. And Brett will talk about this in a little more detail, but everything from continuing the deductibility of interest on municipal bonds to deductibility of state and local taxes have an impact on your local budget, so we'll be watching that very closely. And the county has been very vocal on that. Commissioner Crisalone was out this summer and presented at a congressional forum on these issues. And we will be submitting a letter to Congress in the next week or 10 days. So they're big issues that do impact the county, and infrastructure obviously is extremely important to the county. We'll be talking about the delegation that's coming out next week to present the results of the freight mobility plan, and that will play right into infrastructure, which probably isn't going to come up until 2018. So that's just a little overview of where we are in the first session of the 115th Congress, and I'll let Brett talk a little more about the county's agenda.
Thanks, Jim. As Jim kind of went through, anytime you have a new administration, you have new Congress, you're going to be very busy. And Jim kind of outlined a lot of the different elements that they're working through. And I would say the county kind of replicated this in that they've been extremely busy and active this year. So I'll kind of walk you through the timeline of what's been going on, what we've been focused on, starting with the end of last year, the end of 2016. Per usual, we met with a lot of the county agencies, discussed priorities, and then staff and folks at our offices worked to develop the federal agenda. The federal agenda is the document that we present to the congressional delegation, to federal agencies, to kind of give them a broad outline of the focus and priorities of the county. Of course, things change, but just to kind of have this as the blueprint to work off of has always been helpful and has served us well over our very long relationship. The focus of the federal agenda and the top priorities this last year, of course, transportation, infrastructure investment. That's what you guys are known for. That's what's really resonates with Congress, and hopefully 2018, it's looking like they're going that direction, that they'll have a comprehensive bill, and we're well positioned to work with them on that. We also, of course, focused on tax reform. Jim kind of mentioned the two top provisions, state and local tax deductibility and the tax treatment of municipal bonds. I know that you all are working on a resolution to talk about the importance of those provisions. We've prepared a letter that will be sent to the entire congressional delegation talking about why those provisions are important, along with your resolution that will be sent next week. The book also focuses on the substance abuse issues that the county has tackled in a very forceful manner. You guys have made this a top priority, and it shows. I know when you brought in Kathleen Burke, she's done a wonderful job, and you guys are really leaders. And it showed in May when we met with HHS, and they were really encouraged to hear what was going on in the county. And then, the last thing that we always touch on are the important federal programs. Jim mentioned some of them: CDBG, Community Health Center dollars, EMPG for your emergency management, of course, workforce investment. You guys have shown to be leaders on that, and we continue to tout those programs and the importance of the federal government's budget to support those. Kind of moving to the next step was February, the NACO, the big NACO conference in Washington. I know some of the folks were in for that. We got to spend some time with you all and talk about different things, but I think what was really interesting was we were able to tour a remote pilot program, remote tower pilot program out of Leesburg, kind of see where some of the technology is. It was very educational, and I thought that was very helpful for our understanding of where things are with technology and the Federal Aviation Administration. And then, of course, we worked together to develop some NACO resolutions. You presented them at the NACO conference, both the DC and the national. Those were put in the platform, and continues to show that you guys are leaders not only in Washington but with the large county organization, which is just helpful for the county and making sure that you're involved whenever NACO is trying to bring in folks. And I think that really kind of showed itself when they reached out to County Board Member Frizzlum, and he was able to come in and talk with an esteemed group about tax reform and the priorities for counties all over the United States. And I thought it really helped elevate your profile. So that was wonderful. Now, that was July. Let's go a step back. In May, you did your big legislative meeting in Washington. We met with every single member, both senators, all 6 members of your delegation. We also met with Health and Human Services, the Economic Development Administration, and also DOT, and went over the federal agenda, but also touched a lot on the freight mobility plan that you study that you will be presenting, of course, in Washington at the end of September. Everyone was excited and very interested to hear about that, so I know once, I know it's complete, but kind of the sign off on it, staff have been asking me, when can we get a copy of that? We want to know what the recommendations are, so we'll be sending that to them as soon as that's finalized. And in between that, we've also had follow-up phone calls with Department of Health and Human Services to talk about your efforts with opioid issue. That really resonated with them, and they want to be helpful. We've had talks with the Economic Development Administration and possible partnerships between the county and Lewis University to develop a business incubator. And while the initial proposal was not accepted for funding, they want to work with the group to try and get something moving, and they were very open about if it works for Lewis and they can move forward with another attempt, and the county that they are excited to try and put something together and fund that project. So that was an exciting conversation. And we continue to have monthly grant calls. As you all know, there's a lot of federal grants that come out. This year was a little slower than new administration. We sent, I think roughly over 50 grant announcements this year. I know sometimes it can be in the hundreds and it can be 200. We hold a monthly call just to make sure that everyone's on board. We know what's being applied for. We know where we need to talk to the congressional delegation and let them know, where we want to go with that. And then that takes us to our briefing at the end of September. It's going to focus on the freight mobility study. We have arranged a briefing at the Department of Transportation with high-level, both political and civilian staff at DOT, who will be hearing about the freight plan, which is kind of a follow-up to our May meetings where we kind of outlined some of the top areas where we were focusing on at the time. And then I know next Monday, Senator Duckworth's staff will be coming in. You guys will be briefing her staff on a lot of the top priorities, which is great. We've worked with the entire congressional delegation, but it's always good to get them here in the county to hear what you guys are working on. And then we're hopeful. This isn't set in stone yet, but as kind of a follow-up to the September opportunity where you guys will be coming out and talking about the freight mobility study, we would hope to do kind of a congressional tour in district to look at the intermodal yards and maybe some of your other priorities, so the congressional staff can kind of be on the ground and hear about what's going on in the county. So that's kind of, I'd say an overview of the year and where the county has been focused. And I think, we'll leave it open to questions on any of the priorities or Washington updates.
Anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question. I just want to thank you both for everything you're doing. You're in constant contact, and the amount of work that you don't. And I'm so glad you're here today to present, for the fact that a lot of you in this room don't see everything that they're doing in DC, and I do for the most part, and we appreciate you more than we can ever explain. So thank you.
That means a lot to us. Thank you.
I kind of think this express the same kind of, it's a little bit like a marriage. If you hang in there, it really does get better. If you don't fail out. And our relationship, I think, over time, continues to get better. And we get to know each other even more. You finish each other's sentences, type of thing. So I think our relationship has matured, and as we've done it, maturity. So I'm hoping we continue, and looking forward to future successes. And of course, we'll all be busy as we present our freight study to DC and seek out perhaps grant dollars. Even though we're going to have to be waiting on Illinois, I think, for them to finish their freight study. But I'm hopeful that's some real successes in that area and other infrastructure and funding for our health department and so forth. So we'll keep it at it.
One thing I would like to mention, if I could, Mr. Speaker, is, you know, we mixed it up a little differently this year. And I know you and I and Commissioner Hart spoke about this a year ago. And we spread out visits to Washington, which I think has proved to be very useful. I think we got more bang for our buck. Starting in February with the NACO conference, and then following up with your visit in May, and now we've got the delegation coming out in September. I personally thought that was really good, and I hope we can continue.
It has been, I believe it's been a better approach, even though you can't be working 16 hours.
Hey, no one said coming
But
to
I've had many of
Washington.
those days in my life, so it wasn't my first, but they were long days, but I thought it was very productive days. I do think spreading it out and talking, not only elected officials, but talking to the agencies, talking to the folks who work in the agencies, I think is surely beneficial for us.
Well, I think all of you who have been on these visits to Washington know that it's not fun and games, it's work.
Oh, especially our last.
We keep you moving.
Well, thanks for coming down. And,
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda will be adopting the Will County Community-Friendly Freight Mobility. Andy Snyder from Snyder and Associates, I believe, is going to be the presenter with her team. This what we presented here today is our final draft, correct?
Correct.
And with your approval, we'll be moving this forward. So this is we call it a freight study, but it is a multifaceted. It has multiple initiatives, various initiatives that all deal with freight mobility, including workforce mobility, and so forth. To deal with the overall industry. John, you going to start?
I'm just going to kick it off.
Okay, so.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, members of the county board and associated people here. I appreciate the opportunity this morning to do something very significant for the county, and that is present the final Will County Community Friendly Freight Mobility Plan. And look forward to presenting the same to the county board as a whole. Just a couple of minutes of background. I want to make sure that you understand the genesis of this. And it's always been a partnership between the Will County Board, the County Executive's Office, and the CED. Back in 2006, we hosted the first annual Global Logistics Summit. And in April, we just concluded our 10th annual. So our commitment to this industry sector has been long and deep. In 2006, with the leadership of the county, working with the planning department, we drafted a model cargo container ordinance that has since been adopted by the county and some of our municipalities. Back then, we weren't sure about all these containers coming into Will County, and we were concerned about empty containers sort of piling up in various agricultural districts, and this ordinance really addressed that issue. In 2007, the CED developed the first Will County Transportation Blueprint, again looking at the major projects that would assist both the movement of freight and passenger vehicles. In 2010, in partnership with the Will County Workforce Investment Board, we completed the Will County Inland Port Study. In 2012, also in conjunction with the WIB, we completed the Will County Inland Port Infrastructure Analysis. Two studies that really laid the groundwork for the plan that you're going to learn about and hear about this morning. In 2014, we created the Will County Freight Advisory Council. The Freight Advisory Council was really the source of developing the comprehensive freight mobility plan, again, working in conjunction with all of you. And then, of course, today, the Will County Community Freight Mobility Plan is officially completed. So, quickly, the initial purpose of the plan, number one, to understand the current state of freight movement in Will County. With the advent of 2 intermodal yards and 3 million container lifts annually, clearly our communities, the county, and the region has been impacted by this, but we didn't have the information. We didn't know where the freight was coming from, where it was going to, how much of it was here, starting here and leaving here. The plan provides us with that. We also wanted to study the growth of the industry and its impact on Will County moving forward. So looking at the current state and then looking towards the future, how much of this is coming here and what are those impacts going to be on the county? The plan also studies best practices and their application to our inland port and our communities. As you'll hear from Ann and Jackie, this is a tool for Will County communities to deal and plan and address the impacts of this very important industry sector. One of the most important things we're doing with the plan is identifying critical freight infrastructure projects for federal funding. And that's the core of this plan, and again, you'll learn more about that this morning. And then finally, identifying critical workforce issues and possible solutions. It isn't a day that our office doesn't hear about workforce challenges for all of our employers, but particularly the transportation distribution logistics sector. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the project manager, Ann Schneider. Have at it, Ann.
Thank you. And I want to thank the county board members, particularly the speaker, for their, and the county executive, for their engagement and involvement in what we've been doing. I've done work in a number of areas, and I can truly say that the involvement here in Will County by board members is laudable and it's unique. Unfortunately, in other areas, you'd like to see more participation, but I really do appreciate the fact that you were engaged in this process and really gave us some excellent feedback that was incorporated into this final draft. I want to acknowledge all of the project sponsors. You see the list of them, and they're in your handout too. These are all people that are all organizations that in one way or another supported the project through funding. Starting, of course, with Will County Board, the Will County Executive's Office, the Governmental League, Q is here. The Illinois Soybean Association contributed funds. The CED was very much involved. JADA was a big part of this through the mobility piece for the workforce. We also had the Federal Highway Administration and U.S. Department of Transportation engaged in what we were doing, and those federal dollars that flowed through IDOT is what helped supported a great deal of the study. And then also the Workforce Investment Board and their contribution. They made significant contributions as well. We also had in-kind contributions from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, CMAP. They provided a great deal of the data that was part of the foundation of the study. Slide. So today, CDM Smith, Jackie Murdoch from CDM Smith, who is the assistant project manager on this with them, she is going to present to you some stakeholder engagement recap to talk to you about who we've reached out to, what kind of feedback we got. She's going to go over some of the key findings and as part of that run through some select analyses. Talk about some of the recommendations at a high level that were included in the final draft, and then also discuss, again, at a very high level, the key freight projects. You'll see a map and hear a little bit about that process. And then I will wrap it up to talk to you a little bit about the implementation of the plan and then what the next steps are. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jackie Murdoch to present to you the stakeholder engagement.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks, John. As Ann mentioned, I'll be going through some of the key parts of the plan. And please look through the executive summary that you have in your places for more information. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about what components we're going to be looking for today. And it really is the components that make this plan very unique. So we spent a lot of time on public and stakeholder engagement, which many of you are a part of. We did a lot of industry engagement with freight-related businesses, did a lot of outreach to HR representatives in that industry, talked to a lot of your residents and had surveys and forums with businesses and residents as well. So that was one of the unique components of a freight plan, particularly. We used the Freight Advisory Council through the CED to develop a lot of these recommendations. We had about 7 meetings with them. We met with the Will County Governmental League several times, so met with a lot of the local communities to refine and develop a lot of these programs and projects. Like I mentioned, we met extensively with the freight industry and HR representatives from that industry. We had 2 forums for the freight businesses and 2 forums for HR representatives. We had surveys, and we did many in-depth interviews to really hear from what were the needs of the freight-related industry in Will County. And then we also had a unique effort for truck drivers, where we put a survey in truck driver break rooms to really hear from those truck drivers on what their needs were, what their concerns were, and what the sort of smaller projects that we might not have been able to capture just at a high level look. And then, of course, we did the open houses. We had 3 public open houses and a survey, which was, we had over 575 responses, a significant amount of responses. And another component we added was meeting with environmental groups from the county. So we had 2 different meetings to develop and refine environmental recommendations as well. So what are the key findings? Well, we did a lot of data analysis. Let me see if I can. And this is also one of the more unique components for a county freight plan. We were able to get county-level freight movement, as John alluded to, that talked about what was the value of freight, not just in the region or the state, but within Will County. Where was it going to? What modes was it being traveled on? And what commodities was it shipping? So we were able to put a number to that. And we see over $600 billion of freight was moving in, out, and through Will County. And what does that equate to in terms of the economy? Well, that's about 97% of the Chicago region's gross domestic product, about 80% of the state gross product, and about 3.5% of the U.S. gross domestic product. And I think those are pretty staggering numbers in the sense of how much Will County's freight movement is supporting regional, state, and national markets. Next, we looked at freight flows. So again, we wanted to know what modes was freight traveling on. Where was it going to? Where was it coming from? What portion of the economy was being supported by freight movement in Will County? And we found a lot of interesting components that really make Will County stand out. One is the mode split. So in most of the nation, you see more freight moving on trucks than you do on rail. In Will County, it's a pretty even split. It's about 50-50. And that's largely to do with all of your rail assets in the county. And so you can imagine if you didn't have those rail assets, a lot more trucks would be moving on your roadway system. So that's one unique component. Another is how much freight is moving through Will County. So not freight just coming within Will County or coming to Will County, but just freight that's using your roadway network to move through and supporting other regional and national markets. So in essence, Will County's roadway systems are supporting the nation's economy. And then we looked at within Will County, how much does freight-related businesses contribute to your economy? And we found some pretty impressive numbers. So there's about 106,000 jobs that are supported, that are freight-related jobs in Will County. That yields about $5 billion in earnings. We see about over 28 billion in economic output just from freight-related jobs here in the county. And what does that mean? That's about 55% of Will County's economy are freight-related generation. And that yields about over 37% tax revenue. So you can see it's a large chunk of jobs, it's a large chunk of the county's economy, and a large chunk of the tax revenue. So it's definitely important, both from an infrastructure and a workforce component as well. So speaking of workforce, that's sort of the third very unique component to this freight plan. So not only are we looking at freight movement, where does it flow, what are the infrastructure impacts, but we're looking at the freight-related workforce and the needs of the freight-related workforce in Will County. So we looked at trends, we looked at how much freight-related jobs are growing, how much is it projected to grow. And we've seen a lot of really impressive numbers. So when you look at how much it's grown over the past 15 years, freight-related jobs, you see 138% growth in freight-related jobs in Will County. Now, when you look at other major freight regions like Los Angeles or Chicago or Memphis, you see single-digit growth. So Will County, we saw those 106,000 jobs that are freight-related. It's a lot of growth in a relatively short amount of time, in planning speak. And we think those jobs, according to the projections, are only expected to grow. So over the next 10 years, we think it could grow about 33%, and that's probably a conservative number given Amazon's recent announcements, two recent announcements just over the course of this study. We looked at wages, so we know that there's a lot of wage concern in this industry. There's a perception that there's a lot of lower wage jobs, and there are about 60% of the jobs are warehousing jobs in this industry, the $13 an hour jobs. But there's also 40% of those jobs that are making above $15 an hour. A lot of those are your truck drivers, contributing a significant amount of wages in this industry. We looked at commute flows, so understanding mobility patterns, transit needs, and those commute flows was a significant portion of this study. There's another study as a component of this called the JADA study as well that looks at really detailed mobility and transit needs. And we found that there's a significant amount of workers in this industry that are coming outside of Will County. There's about 38,000 workers in this industry that are coming from Kankakee, Grenby, maybe Southern DuPage. So that tells us a lot about mobility needs in this industry for the workforce. So here are a few slides of key findings. These are some of the elevator pitches, and I'm going to run through some of them, and some of them I've already gone through. But one is freight is critical to the economic success of Will County. You saw some of those numbers about that 55% of the county's economy is freight related. Another is Will County freight movement is critical to the state and nation. So we saw how much through movement is moving through Will County. That's underscoring how important Will County's freight movement is to regional, state, and national markets. We also very much understood that traditional planning approaches really can't handle the pace of freight development experienced in Will County. We've seen how much growth and industrial development has occurred in this sector. You have 138 million square feet of industrial space. That's only expected to grow about 60% over the next 10 years. So, traditional planning approaches can't really handle the pace of change in the county. So we really need to understand how to better plan for future growth. One of those ways is, to marry a land use plan with freight planning. That's one of the key recommendations of this plan. So the next couple of findings have to do with how freight volume growth. So we did some projections on how much growth of freight there is to occur in the county and how that will affect safety and worsen those existing bottlenecks and operational issues. So we see that freight volumes in Will County could reach about 600 million tons, valued over $1 trillion. And traffic on some state and U.S. highways are projected to triple by 2040. So if the infrastructure system can't exactly handle what's already occurring in Will County, you can expect that based on the projections of truck volume growth, that could worsen without strategic investments and outside state and federal grant funding. Continued growth without planning and new transportation investments may impact Will County's economic competitiveness and quality of life. So one of the motivations of the study is the Will County Community-Friendly Freight Plan, is to understand that the freight impact on the quality of life in the county. We saw how much it affected residents when they came out to the open houses through the surveys and their concerns about local trucks, or trucks on local roads, and also how intertwined the freight business really is to the county's economy. So, we want to make sure the infrastructure is obviously supporting a safe and efficient freight movement, but we also want to make sure that it's protecting quality of life for residents. The last two are about really funding projects. So the first is funding and institutional issues make it difficult to invest in freight projects. So in a realm of competing transportation priorities, freight is just one of them. And it's already a very constrained fiscal environment to fund transportation projects as is. So really, multi-jurisdictional planning, working with local governments, working with the state and nation to get those funding needs and resources, and prioritizing freight, particularly in Will County, will be critical moving forward. And the final one is, really the main drumbeat is that Will County needs regional, state, and national funding support. So in essence, improving the infrastructure in Will County improves the region, state, and nation's economy. Because if there's a bottleneck in Will County, you can be sure that that's affecting the on-time delivery and the freight movement across the country. So next I have a couple of maps, and that's just really to highlight a couple of different types of analysis we've done. There's many other maps and charts and data in the full plan, but we wanted to just give you a glimpse of some of the things that we looked at to evaluate projects and understand the freight system. The first is looking at freight assets and clusters. So we looked at industrial development patterns, those freight-related industrial development patterns in the county, and found, really clusters of land that are supporting freight development. We found 3 larger freight clusters, which I'm sure none of you will be surprised where they are. The ones in orange, basically, Romeoville, Bolingbrook, Elwood, Joliet, and then eastern Will County. We also identified a few emerging and projected clusters, one around the Wilmington area with the new Bridgeport, and one in eastern Will County, potentially around the new CSX development. So this is really to understand some of those land use patterns, where trucks are mainly coming from and going to, again, in order to prioritize transportation. The next is to look at safety. Obviously, that was a huge effort. We looked at major truck crashes over 5 years and found where the real hot spots were in the system. So some, might not be surprising along I-80, within Joliet, but you also see some around Elwood, along 57, and again, that helps us to understand where to prioritize freight projects. And then this is a map of truck congested hours, so really where are the segments that trucks are really being delayed. And you'll see, the ones in yellow and orange are significant amounts of truck delay. You can see how ubiquitous that really is throughout the county. So what are the recommendations? Well, we have several different recommendations, and I would definitely encourage you to look in the executive summary if you have time, and definitely the longer plan to understand more in detail. Sorry about that. Skipping ahead. Okay, first is the programs and policies that are that Will County can adopt to improve freight and quality of life. And as you can see, there are about 9 key ones here. I'll just cover a couple of ones that we spent a lot of time talking about. One is the need to expand data collection and modeling, especially on the county's roadway systems, to better understand traffic patterns, condition in a more data-driven way. The other one that we spent a lot of time talking about both with local governments and with the industry is to develop a more transparent freight network. And that can be done in several different ways. Better signage, more signage, better truck routes, more consistent truck routes, not just through the county, but also partnering with your local governments to create a consistent truck route network. And that's really to indicate to the industry where you want them to go, so they don't go where you don't want them to go. And another one that definitely rose up was to better coordinate transportation and land use planning. We've heard this loud and clear from many of you, from many of the residents, and from many of the businesses, and so that's why one of the recommendations is to do a land use plan, for the county to do a land use plan. And then we developed a workforce plan. As I mentioned, workforce is one of the more unique components of this plan. There's a whole chapter devoted to developing a workforce action plan. The industry really led a lot of the developments of this action plan. There's 6 main actions that are mostly private industry led. Again, because that's who most influences, the quality of life and for the freight workforce. The key one here to really understand is that the main driver that is really heard loud and clear through the industry is they want to create a core partnership of these freight-related businesses to increase collaboration between themselves and address common issues. So something like the Three Rivers Manufacturing Association for the transportation, distribution, and logistics industry. So we heard loud and clear that's a desire. Obviously, they think it's the best for it to be private sector driven, for them to identify common issues and identify common solutions to those issues. And then the rest of the actions are really about building the pipeline, so getting into high schools, community colleges early and often, to provide a clear career pathway. So there was a lot of discussion about how there's not good retention in this industry. So they wanted to make sure that there's pathways for retention, raising wages. That was an interesting one. They wanted to investigate how to improve wages in the industry. I know that's a concern for many local governments. And it's also a concern for the industry. They want to retain their employees as well, and they recognize wages as one of the main drivers for keeping or retaining employees. And another one is increasing access. So that's this whole mobility concept between population centers and TDL employment centers as well. So definitely investigating transit solutions and other first and last mile solutions as well. We looked at technology recommendations. So we looked at where you could deploy managed lanes to separate out traffic, to have a more expedited lane for both vehicles and trucks. And we looked at, some more private sector-led technology recommendations such as drone delivery or automation. And then obviously we have a lot of community recommendations that fall along several different issues, from safety to light pollution and aesthetics. I'm not going to run through all of these measures to address, but just know that there are a large amount of measures to address community recommendations. A lot of the concern is obviously trucks on local roads and safety, and we provide a lot of lower hanging fruit to address some of the community concerns. And we have environmental recommendations. So as I mentioned, we met with the environmental groups, a good cross-section of them, and had a lot of in-depth meetings about what those environmental recommendations could look like. And they span, from air quality to encroachment on sensitive areas. So we have a lot of measures to address some environmental recommendations as well, which is, again, a more unique component of the plan. So another, obviously very interesting component, what are the key freight projects and how did we identify those? So we looked at mostly existing projects from the state transportation improvement program, the regional transportation improvement program, some local plans as well, and found about 91 freight-related projects, and that means it's on a truck route or it's on the national freight network, something of that kind, connecting to a cluster, and evaluated those projects and understood what are the key ones for improving a myriad of goals of the freight plan. So we evaluated those projects using all of those metrics that you see on the right-hand side, and those metrics were developed through the Freight Advisory Council, and we had a lot of meetings to discuss how much those should be weighed and what metrics should go in there. So as you can see, it's not just looking at safety, it's not just looking at congestion, it's looking at a really holistic blend of metrics to evaluate and identify important projects that are freight-related. And ultimately, we have 25 top-tier projects. These are all of the top 91 freight-related projects. You can see the 25 Tier 1 projects in the executive summary. Many of you contributed to identifying and refining these projects, so appreciate that input. And as you can see, it crosses the geography of the county and really represents, again, what those metrics between preservation enhancement, environmental sensitivity, community sensitivity, what are those key projects to improving freight mobility in Will County? And with that, I'll turn it back to Ann to talk about next steps and plan implementation.
Thank you, Jackie. As you can tell, a lot of work went into developing this plan. And the whole idea behind it, it's not just a plan that gives you a lot of information. What it is it's a tool. We're empowering the county to take the next step, and the county's partners to walk with them in those next steps to really improve how freight is moving in the county, how much freight supports the economy in the county, and the impacts that has on the county, as Jackie, I think, elaborated on very well. I really strongly encourage you to go through the executive summary. There's some really good infographics in there. The study itself is 238 pages. I've read it 5 times. very interesting. There is a wealth of information in there. The project list, there are 4 tiers of projects after everything was run through the rubric that we put together, or the model that was put together for this. And project numbers do not tie to their priority. There is a system behind the numbers, but it more ties to where they're located on the map. So don't look at those numbers and say, oh wow, they put this project number 1 and this one number 5. You should look at those tiers of projects in the study itself, and you'll see where all of those projects fall out. So in terms of implementing this plan and using the tool now that you have, it's really going to be important that data collection continue going forward. And I'm going to skip down to a dot point further down on this slide where we talk about developing partnerships with higher education to assist with ongoing data analysis. I think that would be a really good first step, is trying to establish some of those relationships with some of your higher education institutions here locally, and doing a data dump with them so that they know how the data was put together for this study, but then give them a chance to move around and play with it a little bit and figure out, if there's other solutions that maybe we might have missed in the original go-round. We want to make sure that we continue the engagement with all of our stakeholders, particularly with the community and with the industry itself. There should be, we're saying here, an annual update of the project list and then execute that prioritization model. I would say do the prioritization model maybe once every 2 years, but should make sure annually that those lists are where you want them to be. We need to coordinate community engagement. In other words, we need to work with some of the municipalities and townships to move forward with some of the recommendations that were included in the study that can have an immediate impact on your system and how freight flows through here. We also need to continue to measure the performance of the system, and then also to make sure that our partners at the regional, state, and national level understand the significance of what's happening in Will County and how that impacts the state, regional, and national economies, and the industry that freight movement supports. Next slide. We also aggressively, and I was really thrilled to hear the federal lobbyist here today. It was interesting to get their update, but working in partnership with what they're doing in DC, to strongly pursue some of those opportunities that are available at the federal level, and we'll talk about those in next steps. And then also here within the state, we need to aggressively pursue opportunities through IDOT. We have federal formula freight dollars that go to IDOT that we want to make sure that the projects here in Will County get on into the state freight plan and on the state freight advisory radar, so that we have that opportunity as an economic development program we could take advantage of. And then, safety being a key component of what we did here, grade crossings and dealing with the issues associated with grade crossings. There's the safety issues, but then there's also the emergency management issues. If your freight traffic is increasing and the number of trains that are traveling through Will County, say double or triple over the next 10 years, you can only imagine what that means for ambulances and fire trucks that need to maybe get over the tracks, and they're stuck by this continual stream of trains. So grade crossing protection fund provides opportunities to get funding for grade separation projects, and you can look at consolidating grade crossings and have grade separation to deal with some of those issues. So that's going to be an important piece of putting together a funding strategy for our key projects. And then we need to look at the other programmatic and policy recommendations, see what we can implement here locally, and then also look to see if there's anything that legislatively, either at the state or national level, you might want to pursue as a result of some of the information that was uncovered through this process. And then finally, there is a very strong emphasis right now at the federal government level on public-private partnerships. And we have a prime example of how public-private partnerships can work with the development and completion of this study. But the programs that are now available through the infra grant program, it's Infrastructure for Rebuilding America, and the new the Tiger 9 program, there's a huge emphasis on public-private partnerships and leveraging non-federal dollars. So those are things that will be part of the implementation of this. In terms of what are the next steps, we're in the process of step number 1, where you're reviewing the plan and you will take action to accept it. Once you are comfortable and have done that, we will publish and publicize the report and provide it to stakeholders. Like at the federal level, we've been contacted quite a bit by some of our project sponsors, the state in particular, and some other individuals as to when they get to see the report. So hopefully next week they'll get a chance to take a look at it and really see how it can make a difference here. Federal grant application, I want to make sure everybody remembers that as part of the contract with CDM Smith and their sub-consultants, they already completed a federal grant application on behalf of the county, and we were going to focus on the Infrastructure for Rebuilding America grant program. Right now, there's $1.5 billion available through USDOT, and those applications are due on November 2nd. So we've got a little bit of time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot. USDOT recently announced the 9th round of Tiger grants. $500 million are available there. Those applications, there's a little more aggressive timeline with that. They're due October 16th. In conversations with the department headquarters in DC, that is going to be focused a great deal on rural communities and areas that support rural communities. And the cap on those grants is $25 million, with no more than $50 million going into a single state. So there are some very definitive constraints on what is available through that program, but I think we need to explore whether or not that's a good fit for some of the priorities that we have. The Freight Advisory Committee is, in terms of next steps, we need to present this to them as a partner in the process, and I think that meeting has been scheduled in October, and I know some of you participate in those meetings, so you'll see more about what we've been doing there. And then finally, the implementation steps that we discussed, and then also as part of that, we are cataloging all of the findings into a matrix. We're going to present those to you to see if you can help us prioritize how you see the implementation moving forward, so we can, one, take advantage of the low-hanging fruit, but two, make sure that we're aggressively pursuing implementing the important pieces of what we've put together in this study. And with that, I just again want to thank you again for supporting the efforts of this study, not just financially, but through meeting and discussing it, but really participating in the process. I think it has made this study stand out from all of the other studies that I've seen that have been done locally for freight planning. And I'm excited because I think we're going to nominate this study for an award through the Planning Association, and hopefully they will see that how unique this is and how great this is, and will accept that. And more importantly, I think for your residents, the implementation of this will have an impact.
Thank you, Ann. Before I take questions, I'd like us to mention a number of things. One, when we talk about this final draft, there is no such thing when it comes to these type of activities. It's never final. This is where we're at this moment in time. So I want to mention that this absolutely has to be a document that is regularly visited and adjusted. So whether it's priorities, whether it's regional activities. For example, this study deals with what's here now. It's not that it doesn't acknowledge potential and have footnotes in the larger study that, we recognize there could be yardage, yes. We recognize there could be another development in Elwood. But because you don't see them here, because they're not here yet. We don't know how many ever built. So much of that falls in the municipality's hands, not the county's hands. You know, these developments go into municipalities, they're approved by municipalities, even though Will County government is impacted because we have more of the infrastructure, the truck use than the local municipalities have. So, I guess I'm just kind of heading this up. Some questions that I think will be asked. But if you ask about future development, all this study does is acknowledge that potentially these are developments that could come to fruition, correct?
Correct.
So don't ask Ann to make comments about future. All we can say is we know they might come, and in those cases, the scenarios in the study change. And it's up to us then to go in and change it. In the meantime, I guess we kind of know the reasons these kind of activities are going in. But I will tell you that we have a lot of communities, a lot of areas that border our interstate highways. And you never know where these things will pop up. You know, so, you know, people may think I represent like areas that are rural, I represent suburban areas. So quite frankly, the suburban areas are more apt to be impacted by this, like by freight, because they're all straddle the interstates. And there's still large pieces of large land masses that are there, that are open. So, so I wanted to mention that. So you could ask Ann the question, but I think she's going to answer pretty much what I just asked. They are acknowledged, but not included necessarily, because it's too early to include them. The other area that I would like to make a comment on, freight friendly. That's an oxymoron, isn't it?
Yes,
Freight
it is.
friendly. You know? But we're certainly trying to acknowledge the fact that livability in this county and living with certain types of development and how to best soften that impact or make sure that we have good planning and the ability to say yes and also the ability to say no. You know, it's here again. It's an attempt to at least acknowledge the fact that it's more than just the commerce part. It is our residents, and that we try to make a quality of life does matter. But things change. You know? When I moved to Frankfurt in 1972, bought my house in 71, moved in 72, and it was pretty darn rural. You know, it's not so rural anymore. And it's just not all homes. There's a lot of commercial development in my area. So things change. And that's, I guess, how it is when you're a growing, attractive county. So, but we do make attempts to acknowledge the livability is important in Will County. Of course, some will tell you that that residential development affects people more than commercial development. And I've seen it go both ways with communities on what they support and don't support. Dan, I'd also like to say that, Ann, you mentioned this right at the end of your comments, but our hope is that this is a model, and that we go to like CMAP and so forth, and they acknowledge and accept this as a working model in the region. And I think it's important to emphasize these planning agencies have a substantial influence on grant dollars. Would you say, Ann?
Yes.
You know, if they're on board, it makes life easier. So, you know, we're going to, and we'll continue to work in our efforts to have CMAP accept this as perhaps the working model for our region. We still have to wait for the state to catch up a little bit, then to finish their study, to understand what should be done at the end of the year.
Yes, in fact, I think they're having a meeting on Monday with their advisory group.
And I believe the state also, here again, will take our document and implement it in the state master document, is our hope, that they'll accept it as we present it. But please accept it as a part of the working document, the planning document for this region. That's another effort we're taking, correct?
Correct, absolutely.
Okay. And I believe that's all important for you all to know. Now, I have read the complete study. I think the executive summary pretty much gives you the gist of it. I've read it twice, and I don't have a good eyesight, so it takes me a while to read this stuff because I have to actually enhance it a little bit. The full study, you all will get the executive summary. The full study will be available. It's a large document, not that easy to download. We will put it on our system. Hopefully, I don't do download it.
Well, it'll be on the project website.
It'll be on the project website.
Yes.
Okay.
And
So
that will include all the appendices too. So the 238 is the base document, but then there is a series of appendices that complement or support what's in.
So what we'll do is that we'll give you the link to the project website.
Yes.
If you would like to review the entire document with all the detail, you'll be able to do that. And we will we'll send when we set the county board agenda today, I would like to give approval to the document next Thursday at this month's county board meeting. So we'll make sure everyone knows they can go to send it and send the link if they'd like to see the entire. So now I'm going to hopefully that kind of lets the executive committee and those who are present know kind of the direction we're going here. So with that, I will open up the questions to the committee first. Yeah, Herb, you have something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, you're on.
Jim, since you already told me what Ann's answer is going to be, can I attack your question?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'll probably tell you what she's going to say.
Jackie, I do want to address how important is the freight workforce to the Will County economy. You did a very good job explaining that. I must admit, we did get this prior to. It does take a time to digest and understand. You did a very good job explaining that, and that helped me tremendously. However, my question is this. You mentioned Amazon, who has a large footprint here in Will County, and you also mentioned several times trucks on our local roads and their safety. However, since your study, you are aware Target stores do not have the footprint in Will County as do Amazon. However, they just recently announced they're almost competitive with Amazon in their hiring. Does that include or does that have the impact on your study at all when other companies, big boxes outside of Will County, also do a massive hiring like that? Wouldn't that also impact?
The growth that we project is coming off of national projection data that was specific to Will County. So that 33% growth is actually produced through the data that we purchased for this study. We think that number is low, and so as we see some of these new announcements coming out, that will definitely influence, and that's another reason why we need to make sure on a regular basis that we're updating the data that we're analyzing as part of this so that we can adjust what we need to adjust to accommodate that growth.
Okay, thank you.
Well, our study, though, doesn't necessarily take into account development that is outside of Will County.
That's correct.
Yeah, I understand that. So there could be impact on Will County, surrounding counties, but it's not anticipated in our study.
Right. We did look at the labor sheds, though, for the major clusters, which is, you know, when we talked earlier, when Jackie talked earlier about the increase, the 61% increase in industrial space over the next 10 years, that's what we were told by the people in those existing clusters they're going to create. So there could be additional growth beyond that. But so, now I forgot where I was going with that.
I'm sorry, I just did this. I was getting a little tired. I apologize.
Oh, well, sorry. I lost my train of thought.
Okay, I've been there. Okay. John?
You guys did a great job. That's a lot of work in this. I really like the uniqueness when we originally sat down with the county board, executive staff, and our committee, and we identified all these little variables. It was very, you did a nice job incorporating everything. I have one question that, you know, as you talk about the workforce plan, you guys had this 6 that you pulled from the industry that deals strictly with the TDL workforce. How do you think, or what do you think it would take to put something in there that addresses identifying other industries that benefit and support the TDL workforce and industries? Because I think things like manufacturing or even logistics consulting, professional logistics consulting, so that from an economic development standpoint and business attraction, I could see this being a great marketing plan for us as Will County to be able to go in and try to get other industries.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and that's something, fortunately, we still have time to address this in the final document, and I think we need to enhance that a little bit more, but if you look back, for those of you that have the handout on slide number 8, where we talk about the economic impact in Will County, the 106,000 jobs in 55% of the economy, that means that's not just in the freight industry itself, it's in that broader array that the freight industry supports. And without this solid freight base, that is the freight reliant portion of your economy. So I think we do need to talk a little bit more about the types of industries that it supports. There are a couple slides in there, but I think we just need to highlight those more. The other thing that I think is important is that as the industry adapts some of these technologies, we're going to see a shift in the type of employment in those industries. We might be moving into some higher skilled employment for them to deal with some of the robotic and automation issues.
Technology, manufacturing in those areas.
So even though it's really heavily dependent right now on that 60% lower wage job, there could be a shift in the future based on that technology adoption.
Well, and we've seen an exodus. I mean, you hear all the reports, the exodus of businesses from Illinois. We need to be able to focus on, show that that's not necessarily the case here in Will County.
Oh, it's definitely not.
We have the opportunity to support this industry and many others.
It's definitely, I agree completely.
Thank you.
If I could make a comment on this particular issue, and that is that, you know, this study is primarily a freight study and a workforce study, and not necessarily is meant to be used as an economic development tool. Now, having said that, it's more of a infrastructure transportation document. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that we can't spin off separately a little bit of an economic development plan separate from this document. But the economic development being based somewhat off the information from this document. So I'm going to strongly suggest that, even though I agree with Mr. Mayor of taking advantage of how to use this as an economic development tool, that it does not necessarily be part of this document, that it's a supplement to this document. Because let's not be, this document, you try to make it, this document, more than it was intended to be. So I strongly agree and strongly think we should maybe spin off another document from this one.
Jim, I don't disagree. There's a number of projects that are coming out of this study. I mean, when you take a look at the projects, the data that's been collected. The only thing I was referring to is as part of the communication to the people in Washington and the state, when we're taking a look at dollars, that it's not just the freight study that this impacts. And I'm not talking about a huge addition to this. I was talking about like a number 7 on a process of things.
Yeah, well, like I said, I just want to make there's a distinction between economic development and I would say with all infrastructure improvements come potentially economic development. Build a road and they will come. It may take them some time, but they'll come. Right? So build an interstate and all of a sudden there's interstate interchange development in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, sometimes. So I just want to make a comment, not to, and I know where you're coming from, Chuck. I just want to make sure as we go forward that it's the document is basically to deal with the freight industry. It was actually more to do with workforce mobility than it was workforce needs, workforce mobility and so forth. So I just want to make Hey, Darren, you would be next.
Thank you. Ann and Jackie, thank you for the impressive presentation this morning. I really appreciate the time and efforts that you put into this. As I was listening to you, what most impresses me about the plan is the balance of economic development and the balance of quality of life that you guys have shown. And, that's important to me. And one of the things that you've suggested is that we take a look at developing a land use plan to protect the residents in the county. And I think that's an important suggestion, and I just wanted to thank you for that. And I think it's something that this board needs to look at as well, and just keep in mind as we're moving forward. So,
I would agree that there'll be, I think, a number of initiatives that come from this, like revisiting a land use plan and so forth. Of course, those land use plans have to be done in conjunction with the municipality. Not so easy as it sounds. Like I say, keep in mind, most of these larger developments do go within the municipal boundaries. They're not developed on a corporate account. So certainly encouraging municipalities to perhaps visit their land use plans with some information they may get from this document, I think is a good way to start. And Hugh's out there. And then certainly we'll be going to the governmental league, and I'm sure Hugh will be making some suggestions of how municipalities potentially can use the document. Right, Hugh?
Yeah, I think the municipalities have been a part of the process the whole time, and they'll continue to have an interest in the plan. And I know they're certainly looking forward to reviewing the not final draft, but the final for now draft, and and seeing what we can do to better coordinate and make everybody's life a little bit easier.
I'd just like to go along with what Darren was saying and agree with him, but I wanted to say thank you for putting this plan together, because a lot of the projects that are going on do have impact in my district, and as well as freight and mobility in general. So it's a continuing concern, and it's a step in the right direction. So I just want to say thank you.
I just go what she's telling me. Right? Whoever pushes their button first. Judy, go ahead.
Okay, I have a couple questions here. One of my questions is, I know that we had a lot of large logistic companies involved in this, and I know that some of the smaller ones in my area didn't even know that there was a freight study going on. So I was wondering, what do we plan to do with the smaller logistic companies? Have you even identified them? Because they have a lot of truck traffic to the roads, that, I mean, I don't know if we're seeing that. So that's my first question.
So we started with first, we went to, and you might want to help me with the technical piece of this. We went to the county and got a list of all the businesses, and there was a list of 220. So we did do outreach to all of the businesses. The ones that engaged were the ones that voluntarily, after our outreach, engaged with us. So if we missed them, apologize. But hopefully we got a good cross-section of not just the large, but also the smaller logistics-based businesses. And as we go forward, I think it'd be important for us maybe to hook up with you and see if we can have some communication with them, just to make sure as we continue to gather data that we're getting their information.
Okay, great, thank you. My other question is, how did you determine the freight that travels through the county but doesn't generate from the county?
That's coming from the TransSearch data set that was purchased, and TransSearch is owned by IHS, which is a national economics firm, and they have county-specific information that they generate based off of data that they have, and then models that they use to make it local specific.
Okay. And I think you've kind of answered my one question I was having, that 60% of the workforce right now makes less than $15 an hour. We got people at McDonald's want to make $15 an hour. So I know that's a big concern because they have massive employment at these facilities, and people are counting on being able to live off these salaries. So, but you say with robotics coming in that there's an opportunity there for them, so that's good to know. And then I just wanted to hit on something that Hugh mentioned, was that the municipalities are involved in this conversation for helping. We do have to have a regional plan that works together so we can get trucks from here to there. I just want to make sure that some of our rural townships are also contacted, because I live in Will Township. There's no municipality strictly in my township. It's pretty empty, and I know Wilton Township is the same, yet we got truck traffic going through. So I want to make sure that we have our township officials be part of this conversation.
Yeah, and I think they necessarily should be, particularly when we start talking about truck routing.
Right.
So I think, it's not just in the county, and it's not just on city roads, it is those townships as well. So that's definitely part of when we sit down to develop that will be part of the implementation strategy.
Okay, thank you.
Along those lines, I'm going to make a suggestion, even though I believe I've made this suggestion, you may have already talked to a lot of them. But that's, of course, there's no, townships have more roads than any other combined local governments. They have more than the county has, they have more roads than collective municipalities have. And of course, the highway commissioners meet regularly. So, and they have a highway commissioner association, Will County Association. And so I would suggest that, and Jeff Ronaldson here. Jeff Ronaldson works with them and communicates with them regularly, and I believe goes to their meetings once a month. So I would suggest that because I agree, that we reach out to the highway commissioners, because they're the ones who really have jurisdiction over the roads. It's not the township. I think it's best to go directly to the highway commissioners. So since we already have an association, perhaps they could do like a subcommittee off that, Jeff. You may suggest something along that line, so you have to live with all of them, but then there's a representation of them. And I think you get, you not only get, I think, good information, you're going to get some stubborn people really talking about how, and who have a passion for roads. So I think you'll get good information from them. So I think we should establish that sooner than later.
Yeah, that will be one of the immediate action items.
Okay. And I believe you can work with Jeff on that. Because Jeff, you meet with them once a month. The county engineer works on their projects, and think it might be a good way to be introduced to that group, Mr. John. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mike?
Yeah, first I want to thank John Grueling for getting the ball rolling and kind of moving us along, the county board for deciding to make this a major focus for us. And certainly Ann and Jackie for everything you guys done. It's a great report. I just wanted to kind of capitalize on what the two of you were saying, economic, more afraid. But the key is, the Fed's being interested in the P3s. I think we have to push that avenue a little bit, especially when we're out there in a couple of weeks. And obviously, this is a roadmap, pun intended, for the projects that we need to be doing, but it's also a roadmap from some of the developments that want to come in here. North Point, for example, sounds like a great development. They're willing to build roads. That should kind of become part of our plan, and they can use our plan to say, hey, we want to do something here, but we see that maybe you have a project there. Is there a way we can P3 that and continue on with the road that we want to build? So I think we need to push, when we're talking in 2 weeks, that this is a P3 plan in effect, because it lets all those developers coming in know where we have challenges and that we want to work on, and maybe you want to work on it with us so that you can move forward faster with your development.
And I think that's an excellent point, and it is one that we do make in the big plan, and it's in one of the recommendations, or it might be in a series of the recommendations that is part of that land use planning,
Right.
that we should look at that when we're talking to developers, that they make a contribution to account for some of the external impacts of what they're doing.
Yes, along those lines, and I know Jim Smith had to leave, but I think you can answer this. You know, there was a point in time where the federal government, as far as, you know, Department of Transportation, and the philosophy was not to put money in private sector projects. Now it's kind of flipped, correct? Now they're very interested in like T3s, where before they were not.
And it's very prevalent in the notice of funding opportunity for both of the current grant programs, that's their focus. And the president has had a meeting with state DOT officials recently, or the president's, some of his appointees have had that meeting, and they have strongly suggested that some of that funding and responsibility for transportation projects get devolved back to the states, where they can do more of these public-private partnerships.
Yeah, and the other question that follows the same line is that there was a time when the federal government would not participate in any toll authority projects, and that's changed a little bit also, hasn't it?
The current surface transportation law says that you cannot toll an existing facility, but if you do, you have to add an equal number of, or make sure that you maintain the same number of free lanes. So if you wanted to do a managed lane project, you could, if you built new lanes for the managed lane, you could toll the managed lanes. Otherwise, under the current law, you would have to pay back the federal government their investment in that infrastructure. And so that makes that cost prohibitive. So tolling existing infrastructure is difficult unless you're adding an equal number of lanes.
So there was opportunities, not more up in the P3s, but still not so much with toll.
Yeah, they do have some special experimental authority that they can grant. It's been limited to just 5 states, but there might be some push in any future surface transportation legislation that broaden that.
Okay, Tom and Suzanne, I'm not sure which one was pushed to run first, so not okay.
You talked about, needing a land use plan. We have a land resource management plan. Did you look at that plan? I thought that was our land use plan. It lays out what the existing uses are, and I believe some of the proposed uses. Have you looked at that plan?
Yeah, we did a catalog of all the land use plans, not just the counties, but also the municipalities. We took a look at that, and the suggestion is more along the lines of laying out strategies for these types of developments as part of that process.
So it's kind of fine-tuned what we have, or expanding based on
Yeah,
future needs or development.
right, exactly.
Suzanne, did you? I'm not going to non-committee members, Mr. Bowden.
Yeah, great. I really am impressed with it. But I did have a question. In, like North Point is talking about building a road in, so to help with the traffic problem. Well, in my district, they have numerous warehouses in Lockport along 355, and that's not conducive to building one road to go in and out. And one of the things that Mike brought up, and I was going to ask you, did you guys address doing a partnership or some kind of thing with Google Maps or GPS? Because the drivers, I know how drivers are. You make the turn, and now you're in a weight limit you can't be in, which is happening in my district. So then the truck driver gets scared because they don't want an overweight ticket, and they go in the subdivision and turn around, and then they ride over people's grass because the trailer won't make the turn. And if we had some way of getting a mechanism set up with Google Maps, this would help tremendously. Because like when I used to drive a truck, I would call the destination point and say, how do I get there? Well, they don't do that now. Now they go to their telephone and get Google Maps, and they tell them go this way, and it's the wrong way.
Yes, absolutely, and that is one of the early implementing items that we recommended, is that we would coordinate with all of the jurisdictions to develop what that truck routing looks like and what those truck restrictions are. If a local government designates a truck route through the IDOT process, that information goes to IDOT and it's supposed to go to those GPS providers.
See, I'm being told by Lockport that they are having problems getting GPS to put that in their
And the GPS providers go to IDOT to get that information. So we just have to work with the communities, and I think we talked to the governmental league about how to do this, to help them properly designate those truck routes, and then how to get that information from the proper designation to IDOT to the GPS provider. So that is absolutely.
I just want to make sure it was addressed.
Yes, it is an
a real important thing.
Yes, it's absolutely an action item, and that's one of the key action items that I think we can implement pretty quickly.
But great job. I'm really impressed.
Any other questions? Okay.
Speaker?
Oh, you got something?
Sorry. I know Jackie and Ann had alluded to our separate study that we had going on.
Why don't you state your name so we have...
Sure. Rick Kwasniewski with the Joliet Arsenal Development Authority.
Okay.
So we converted a grant that we had gotten from IDOT that was originally going to be used for a TMA, a Transportation Management Association. And so we've worked with, obviously some of you know this already, the county, and converted our grant into workforce mobility to mirror and work along with your study. So Chapter 4 in your study is a synopsis of our bigger workforce mobility study, which is going to be completed in the next 30 days as well. And we'll make sure that you guys get that full report, because that goes into detail a little more about where people are coming from work, how we can get them there, how we can work with the transit agencies and so forth. So the details, the more bigger details of that section will be in that separate report, which you'll also get. So.
Yeah, and I apologize, Rick, you're absolutely right. We should have probably highlighted that a little bit stronger.
Okay, is there any other comments by board members, any from the general public, I would think? Okay, step up, Ron, and state your name.
Ron Coleman, Community Development Director.
Okay, Ron, I like the kid Ron because he can go on for a while. Go ahead, Ron.
Impact on workforce housing. Where does that fall into this? I know that the 38,000 people coming from outside the area. I know we talked about this initially when we met. Where does this fit in? Is this under land use planning, or is this under some other?
Well, I'm going to answer you, Ron. I mean, and even though this subject has come up, both from Ms. Schneider and you and some others, whether we were going to include, or whether we should be including housing, and affordable housing, and housing is more than just affordable housing. You know, sometimes you need to talk about, we need more executive type housing to get the executives to come here. So we directed Ann, and I'll even say, you know, I nudged her and said, for the purpose of this study, just like I mentioned about economic development, it was not going to become a housing study. It was never an intent to be a housing study, availability for affordable housing or non-affordable housing. It just is not part of the study. It's a transportation. And even on the workforce side, this originally started out as workforce mobility, not necessarily the availability of workforce. It was more about mobility. So we kept that focus about transportation. What you're talking about would be certainly something the county could take a look at, or the and I understand why you're interested, Ron, because you do the administration of our HUD funds. But generally, housing and housing patterns and housing affordability is addressed more from the federal government than agencies like us. So, the answer, as I said, I'm answering the question. Schneider and Associates was pretty much directed not to take up that issue of housing. So I don't think it's fair for Ann to have to answer to that when basically the direction from the county board, who is responsible for the study and the direction of the study, made that kind of determination. And I believe I mentioned that a number of times at our various meetings, that we were not going to take that up. So, Ron, it's a subject that certainly is worthwhile, that we can take on another day, but it was not part of this particular project. Okay? Say yes, it's okay.
I understand.
Okay, thank you. Now is what I'm talking about. Okay, you understand. I'm not always sure about that, Ron, but you're basically persistent on what you are charged with doing. So I commend you for that. So it's not a criticism. Okay, so any other questions? Okay, Ann, thank you very much. Jackie, everybody else who was involved, thanks very much. So I'll entertain a motion to move this for approval to the Will County Board. Got a motion second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Okay, number 3, review of compensation for the Board of Review and Supervisor assessments. This is a discussion. Let me say that I believe everybody got the basic information, the salary history. This is an area that I'm going to have to give a little history lesson there. The county board, by statute, and Mary, I'll probably be looking at you for help here, by statute, sets the compensation for the board of review and the supervisor assessment. Don't ask me, since I've been here the longest, I can tell you that the county board was not taking this, was not setting those salaries. In the absence of not setting the salaries, I suppose they should have never been changed. I'm just, you know, I'm going to go on there. I'm just saying that. So we, as a board, didn't take on the responsibility to do it we should have. And whatever happened in the past, and actually we took this up with the board of review at least 4 years ago, I believe, right? And we said, well, wait a second, they're getting increases, who's approving it? And it turns out they were getting increases like employees. I don't know exactly who was making the determination how their salaries were being increased. it got to a pretty significant amount, for which really is part-time type of activity. Part-time in the fact that they're in sections for whatever, 3-4 months out of the year, not implying that they don't do other work, but pretty much their work is done over a 3-4 month span. And at that time, we took on the responsibility of setting that salary. And we set it, we just froze it where it was at. And of course, my suggestion with the board review is that we just continue to leave it at the current compensation. So I'm going to kind of throw that out there for the board review. And someone make a motion to leave the compensation where it currently is at.
So moved.
Get a motion? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now, the only other thing I might ask you, the board review, any appointed person, the county board sets the salary. Every 2 years, their terms come up. You can change it to anything you want. There's no, oh, they get an increase, don't get an increase, or we can, can decrease it, we can decrease it. The point I'm making is their term is up, correct, Mary? And we set it for the next term, the salary.
Right, well, they have staggered terms, so you are necessarily.
We have to do it every 2 years, I think.
Right.
Right, so it requires us to do it every 2 years. So I'm going to tell staff, put it in the calendar, that around this time, 2 years from now, we take up to something.
So you presently have a resolution that sets their salary and freezes it through 2019, which you have members who will serve at least nearly to that time period.
Okay, so we're setting it going forward to 19.
Well, I think it's already been set, so I don't think you need to take further.
You don't think we
action.
need to take any action?
I don't think so.
Just leave it where it's at?
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. So the resolution will continue to go forward. And in 2 years, we have to look at it.
Yeah, at the end of 2019, you need to look at it.
Okay, so make sure that it's in the calendar for 19. Okay. Now I have to go to the supervisor assessments. Same thing holds true here, is the fact that the county board has the responsibility for setting the supervisor assessment salary. The last time we set the salary was what year? It would have been when we did the new contract.
Well, she had a contract when she was hired.
Correct.
That provided that her salary would increase in conformance with the other employees of the county. And so I think that's the last time that county board addressed it. So her salary has increased at the same rate as other employees in the county.
Well, I don't know whether, that's what her contract is.
But,
So the
but,
board-
but I thought that contract only lasted.
But the contract did end. And in the absence of, did the contract basically say it continues forever?
Not a contract?
It did not. I don't recall that
So,
it did, but.
I don't want to get into, I think there was, I just don't think we addressed it. People had different answers. I thought there was a continuing contract that automatically renewed, and that's why I probably never brought it up. I thought the contract, in the absence of us not renewing it, automatically renewed.
Well,
There was some compensation. I guess what I'm saying is, in the past, there was certainly some confusion there. But here's where we are today. And so when you say, given what employees are given, well, for non-exempt employees, or for non-union employees, it could arrange anywhere. It could range from 0 to 3%. Just because you're saying, well, we're going to make a certain percentage available, doesn't mean that's what it was. So when you say it says about what general employees were, well, what's that mean?
No, it said with the union. It would go.
It does say union.
The union. And then there were subsequent resolutions passed by county board at the time they would approve union contracts that dealt with non-union. And it was all lumped in.
I'm a little taken back by what happened in the past, to be honest with you. But I'm trying to look forward here. So the supervisor assessments currently makes what?
$4,000.
$134,000.
$134,450.
Okay, so I'm going to open up for a discussion, or I'll take recommendations on salaries for the supervisor assessments. I would leave it for,
You know, and
I
I
would
would,
increase what it was there.
you know, unfortunately, that we have an oversight. That someone wasn't watching the contract here. And I think that it would be, just like we did with our commission, that we would leave this as is at this point. And this has been a long-term employee that I know puts in a lot of hours and a lot of work and energy here. Is this high? Yes. This is a very high salary. I don't know how it compares to everybody in the county, but it's in the top 5%.
On the executive branch, I think it's the highest.
The highest salary going
Second
on.
highest salary.
But it's also one of the ones that are one of the most important ones in regards to making sure that the revenues and things that are coming into this county are done in a way that are accurate and in a timely fashion. And so I would make a motion to keep it as it is, and we could this time and review next year.
A second, then we'll do discussion. Second, good discussion. Mary, there is one other question I have to ask you. I want to make it perfectly clear that basically would occur in the absence of a new contract. The terms of the old contract continue to go forward.
Typically, that's the case.
Okay, I want to make it clear that the county board is terminating that contract. Do we need to put that in the resolution?
Yes, I think that would be a wise decision.
Okay,
We
so-
recognize that that contract is no longer in effect.
Okay. Do I need to entertain a separate motion for that?
We can put it all in one resolution.
As an amendment, I would.
Okay, I just want to make sure it's all, that the old contract is addressed and there's no conflict going on.
I would amend my motion to include that.
Okay. Okay, so we got a motion and a second discussion. Anyone?
I agree.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I agree too. I just want to make sure that how this happened in the past doesn't happen again. If the contract was over, why was it not brought to attention, and who allowed that increase to happen?
So who authorized the increase? But you know,
I still don't know.
I'm going to just assume that, I shouldn't assume anything. I don't know if your point about taken, I don't know if the supervisor assessment put it forward, or it didn't come to the county board, Nick, did it go to your office for review? I don't know.
My understanding has always been once these positions are appointed, they're treated like an elected official, so it's not the county executives authorizing it. It's the board that sets.
I'm not even sure it came out of the supervisor assessment.
And may I suggest that we do a review of.
Bruce, you're HR, so you have to approve it. So.
Well, I don't approve salary increases, so.
All right.
Can you tell us? So normally yes, the process had been that any change of status form gets funneled directly to the payroll department, and they would process it based upon the documents that were provided. I went back. Now, you know that our payroll director retired last year, so I can't question her on her procedure. However, I can tell you that when a request for a change of status came forward earlier this year, it was brought to my attention. So that's when I reviewed the form, and it didn't have any authorization signatures on it other than somebody from the Supervisor of Assessment's office. And so I brought it forward to both County Executive's office as well as the County Board's office, because I didn't feel that there was proper authority to actually authorize any increases. So then I went back and looked through prior years to kind of piece together what had happened. And these prior increases were based on another assistant state's attorney's opinion about treating her as an employee and looking at the prior resolutions the board had passed for non-bargaining unit employees. So obviously that is incorrect. So that's why we're going forward. And now any type of salary increase, especially for non-union or elected appointed officials, things like that, they have to come across my desk before that they can actually go into the system.
We probably should make it clear that the supervisor assessment position is not that of an employee, it's an appointed official, which I want to make a distinction in that supervisor assessment should have never, in my opinion, should have never been treated as a regular employee. There was an opinion given. Mary, I think that we kind of reviewed that. You would agree that appointed officials are not a regular employee?
Well, I think what we would do in the future is when you pass the resolutions dealing with non-bargaining unit members, you would make that distinction with regard to appointed, because from a legal perspective, they are an employee.
Well, we're all employees. I'm an employee.
Correct.
We're all employees.
That's
So when the state statute says this person's salary will be set by this board, it certainly makes a distinction.
I would just say we'd make that very clear in any further resolutions set, dealing with the non-bargaining, so that there isn't any confusion going on.
So I think the short answer, Mike, is it was approved through the supervisor assessment's office based on an opinion from the state's attorney that supervisor assessment was an employee versus a appointed public official.
Well, that brings up the other question then. The way we have it, correct me if I'm wrong, a non-bargaining unit department can give the raise that the union gets within their budget. It's up to the department head, right? So,
or it could be the elected official.
All right. But is the department head able to give themselves the raise too? In any of those departments?
Well, I think in those cases, the elected official oversees that office. Does the...
That's why it comes to us.
No, for example, I'm going to use Nick as an example. Nick is the chief of staff. Nick may recommend increases for the staff, but when it comes to him, it has to come from the elected official, which would be the county executive. I mean, that's how it kind of works, in my opinion. And there may be others that the elected official would make a determination. Is that pretty much how it works in your office, Nick?
All payroll or salary increases are approved by the county executive ultimately. I can make recommendations, but in our office, that's the policy. He approves all.
He signs off on
He signs on everyone that's underneath him.
So basically, in this case,
no, he wouldn't sign off on the supervisor's assessments because it's an
independent
independent office. They run their own office.
It's an independent office. I mean, it's appointed, but it's an independent office. In this case, I'll get right to it. The supervisor assessments approve their own to the office.
That doesn't work for me.
Well, it doesn't work for me either. But going forward, it won't happen again. Let's put it that way. And the other within the resolution.
Real quick question.
Well, let me finish this. I think is also important. In this resolution, you need to say how many years the salary is for. So if you say this is what it's set for the next 2 years, I would in the future roll all this into maybe when we review elected officials, but sometimes we don't take up elected officials, and if we don't take it up, the salaries stay the same. I want to make sure clear that in the case of the supervisor assessment, that also holds true. If we don't address the salary, it stays where it's at. So in this case, do you want to review it every year, every 2 years? I would suggest we do it every 2 years when we review the board review. That's my suggestion.
Which is not necessarily saying that.
So that needs to be in the resolution also, Larry. I would suggest that we make it for a 2-year term, then we'll make it, and that way we address the supervisor assessments and the board of review at the same time.
So do you want, the board of review, their salary is set to December 1st, 2019.
We'll do the same here.
Do the same for the supervisor assessment.
Okay. All right, so then it's good.
Okay, are there any other situations like this that might come up? Yeah, I mean, no, we've had 2 today, so with the board of reviews, and so we have no more contracts out there that.
No. This was actually, I believe, a very unique situation because of the appointed status and the opinion of a different assistant state's attorney. I wanted the board to be aware that our change of status forms do have and require an elected official or judiciary signature for any change of status that changes somebody's salary. Again, this was a unique situation because of the opinion letter that was given to us. Other than that, we require an elected official's signature on any salary changes.
You may want to make a note in this case that will require a resolution of the board.
Absolutely.
I don't want a future speaker being able, or a one county board member having the ability to sign off. It requires a resolution from the board.
Yes. And so the statute language will go in with that file for any salary change.
So the question is, back when when I'm looking at the salary history, so just make it clear for me if you haven't already, because you haven't, because I'm asking you again. Between 2014 and 2015, we saw that bump in pay from 113,880, and it was with retro pay. So that 1 year she was paid 138,695. Currently 134,450.94. I just want to make clear, how did that bump happen? So I'm really clear on the issue.
So
Sir.
when you settled I'm sorry.
I can answer that question.
Okay, that's fine.
And same as you were saying, it was after the settlement of the last contract, after the strike, there was a lot of retro pay given to the bargaining unit members, and that's where this bump of $16,913.29 in retro pay came in, because the prior, from 29 to 2014, the salary was stagnant.
Okay. So then my other question is, if she's paid like an elected official, she currently is making more than all our elected officials. So that's kind of up in the air for me. Why is that happening? Because I'm just curious about that.
She had the ability to take increases without our authorization based on an opinion and the contract.
Well, and I do want to add, Mr. Lodi received these increases the same way for years. And your previous chief of staff was aware of this process. So it's not as if this was done in a vacuum. It was, and maybe it wasn't the right way to do it, and I'm not saying it was the right way to do it, but it had been in practice for for several decades.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It was and here again, it was the county board just not having the knowledge that the county board has oversight of the board of review. Just like it has some oversight of the executive branch of government in the sense of approving employees, setting budgets, and so forth. And there was just a total, I think, we just did it the wrong way. I mean, we took past practices, which were just bad. Not the correct ones. I don't even want to say bad. They weren't the correct, it wasn't the correct way of doing it. We're correcting it now. I would say that I'm not happy with what happened in the past, but hey, I was around for those couple decades, wasn't I? I didn't know. I pretty much thought that everything was done within the budget.
Mr. Mason, I just want to say too that since I came on board, Rhonda did come to you, she came to Mary, and we all did discuss this, and that's why we're here today, is because we want to do this the right way. And it's by statute, and this is what the statute is asking you guys to do.
So we have a motion and a second. Go ahead, Ray.
I'm sorry, just a really quick question. So last time in February of 2015, we passed a resolution that covered the board of review for 5 years. It ends at the same time when you're looking to do it, but are we going to move forward then looking at it every 5 years or every 2 years?
No, every 2 years.
So then we're going to move the
We're
review
up
back
to
to 2 years?
19, and then I don't know how that happened either. I was here for that, so I guess I'm blaming myself. But we're going to make it every 2 years. Okay. So, okay, so we have a motion and a second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carried, and we'll go on, so. Okay, well, if I keep you so much longer, I'll have to buy you lunch next time. So, okay, the number 4, I'm going to entertain a motion to remove this from the agenda since at the request of 91 ESTV board. So I'll move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Next, we have awarding a bid for the Fairmont Drainage Project for Will County. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Authorizing lease agreement for the Pitney Bowes mail management system. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Declaring various equipment surplus and authorizing disposal. Move. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Renewing contract for the telecommunications time and materials. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Authorizing contract with Tridon Manufacturing Company, Inc. for incumbent worker training grant. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Name change. Okay. Authorizing name change of the James to Janet Court in Wheatland Township, County Board District 1.
Move.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Authorizing IDA for the City of Aurora for electronic recycling.
Move.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Authorizing an amendment of the joint agreement with Bolingbrook and the CDBG and Home Investment Partnership Grant Program. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Authorizing RTA enhancement mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities continuation project grant award agreement. Move. Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Adoption of successor collective bargaining agreement with the County of Will, Enhancement Council 31 Local 1026 for executive branch and licensed practical nurses. We did come to an agreement with our bargaining group. Unlike our last negotiations, there was no work stoppage. There was a lot of cooperation on both sides. And I can tell you that I've been involved in many negotiations over the past. This has been, I think, one of the smoothest, most cooperative negotiations I've seen since I've been here. So heads up to everybody. A big thank you to everybody who was involved in making this a smooth process. So we got a motion? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Brian, this is always, has the membership ratified it yet? Does anyone know?
No, they're scheduled to hold the ratification vote on Monday, the 18th.
And this is all hinged on ratification?
Yes, it's contingent on that.
On the members. Okay.
Absolutely.
Margaret? Okay, so the agreement will not be part of the packet, because we have to wait for ratification from the membership. So, okay, Next 15 is the adoption of revised and amended group health benefit plan and established to benefit plan premium contributions for certain union, managerial employees, non-bargaining unit employees, elected officials, and retirees.
Mr. Chairman, before you vote on this, on 14, County Board Member Parker would like to be an abstention on 14.
Okay.
15.
Okay, so you got that, so 15?
Move.
Number 14.
Second?
Second.
Second, let's focus now. 16, replacement hires for the county executive's finance department. Motion? Move. Have a second? Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Replacement hires for the Department of Transportation. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Replacement hires for Sunny Hill Nursing Home. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Proclamations, Chuck Kerr.
We got 3.
We have 3. Okay. You know who's gonna read them? Are they gonna read them from the desk, or is it a presentation?
By the,
Will these be read from the desk, or are they gonna be presentations?
2 of them are presentations.
2 are check presentations, okay. And
Now, what about the third one? Did you decide on the third one?
You know what, I'm having some challenges
Well,
with
you know,
that.
you-
Let's,
you
you and I
guys
talk about
work
this.
it out.
We'll get it.
Okay, so next we have the appointments by the county executive. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. I guess that I didn't approve the proclamation, so motion to approve proclamation.
Second.
Motion second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries.
18 we skipped. Yeah,
Oh,
the
18 I
maintenance
skipped.
department.
Replacement hires for the county executive's maintenance department. Move. Second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Okay, so do we have any other new business to bring forward today? Good, Tim.
2 days ago, I got a call from a clerk in the First Midwest Building, the Sheriff's Department. She said they're starting preparing for asbestos removal, and the employees didn't know anything about it. She was concerned about the exposure to the employees and stuff like that. And I understand they probably should have been notified ahead of time that this was going to happen. So they could talk about it. Now, I understand there's a meeting today at 1 o'clock with the employees to fill them in on the details. But she brought up, why didn't we wait till the building was unoccupied and then take the asbestos out? But I think, we should look at this closely when we do this kind of work.
Let me say it, I am aware of this, but let me mention this, this is not the first time we've done asbestos removal while people are within the building, working within the building. We hire the most professional, we follow the best practices when we do this kind of work. In other words, it's sealed off, we will be monitoring air quality in the building to make sure there's no migration. It means a lot for us in our scheduling that we are able to do the demolition as soon as they move out. So we will continue best practices. Maybe it was unfortunate that they weren't notified, but we've done this kind of work in numerous buildings while we've had employees in the buildings. We have to make sure that we're applying the best practices. Nick, I guess I'm going to look at you a little bit. I don't see Joel here, but I don't know if you want to comment since your office has a little oversight of this.
Yes, what you've said is absolutely correct. Dave Tack and Joel have been overseeing this. Dave, I know, is out today, but there are containment procedures, best practices. There is monitors. This is being done after hours, and I don't think this is a secret. I mean, we've been talking about it at county meetings. That doesn't mean the line staff, but the supervisors and those who attend these meetings are aware that we were doing this because we have talked about this at committees. But every safety precaution that's necessary is being taken, and the monitors are there to make sure that those safety procedures aren't compromised. So, and it is, as you said, it's to keep us on schedule. It would be great if there wasn't anybody in the building, but this is to keep the schedule. And it's on floors where we don't have employees. It's in the basement and the 4th floor. The floors where we have employees, we're waiting until they exit the building.
So we're not, so we're separation is we're not on the same floors. I might add that I believe that we approved a number of contracts for the agreement that came through this board. I mean, this was not something that was not known. It was very public. We approved it. And certainly, our employees absolutely come first. We would not do anything to jeopardize their health in the work environment. And that's why we've used best practices and now my understanding is we're now going to also add some additional air monitoring or environmental monitoring to make sure there's no migration.
There may be some additional, but there were always plans to have monitors in there because that's, like you said, we're using the firms that are the best, best firms in the business.
So I think that certainly, hopefully, when they meet with the employees, they will feel at ease. State's attorney worked with the office, worked with this stuff forever.
Well, I don't know that was airborne, but it was certainly
yeah, so anyway, we're absolutely using best practice. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to go through this quickly. Is there any comments about land use? Any comments about finance? Any comments about public works and transportation? Anything? Any comments anyone want to make about judicial? Public safety, does they want to make any? How about that? Okay. Legislative and policy. Okay. Capital, I'm told I have to stop at capital.
Ray, there's one that's going to be on your agenda next week that's going to require county executive to sign for the purchase of the furniture.
Yes.
So that needs to come to the full board. So if you can save a space for it
We have it on our
the
agenda.
board agenda to be heard on
So
the
you're
next
making a motion to leave that
I'll make
space
a
for the
motion.
agenda?
Thank you.
We have a motion, second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Anything under capital? Any questions or anything about executive? Okay. Is there any public comments today?
You have one over
To my right. Okay, yes, state your name and.
You want me to come up, Jim?
Yeah, you can come up. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is D.L. Hookstrad, Director of Operations of Police Management. Mr. Speaker, members of the board, it's a pleasure to be able to take this opportunity. I know everybody's hungry, so I'll try to make it brief. With me today is also Doug Hopkins. He's our Senior District Manager who operates both the Prairie View Landfill and the Blair Lakes. I wanted to address this committee just briefly on the Prairie View landfill operation and the current service area restriction that exists, that has been part of the federal legislation and is also included in the host agreement that currently exists between Waste Management and the county. As you know, there were two restrictions that were placed on the facility federally by Congressman Jerry Weller quite some time ago. One of those was a life restriction, which the county was successful in getting lifted several years ago, and we're very grateful for that. It was a wise decision for the use of that facility. The remaining restriction is a service area restriction, which only allows waste material to come to the site that is generated in Will County area, municipalities that lie in Will County, or municipalities that lie partially within Will County. So, for instance, part of Naperville lies within Will County, and so Naperville does, in fact, come to this facility since Waste Management calls that community. Other examples would be Orland Park and others that I could mention. But the importance of this is, I think the county needs to recognize that the revenue stream that's being generated by this facility for the county, it's significant. Since 2004 to date, the facility has brought over $47 million into the county's revenue stream. As we have begun to see businesses, our business change, and more competitors are entering the marketplace. And there's an example I'll give you is Waste Connections is a major waste hauler in the country, and has recently entered the Illinois market, Chicagoland market, and pushing forward into the suburbs. That impacts how volume is moved and hauled to various facilities, and it impacts when how we are able to manage this volume that comes into our facility. So for instance, a recent example would be the City of Joliet's municipal contract was out for bid. Fortunately, Waste Management retained that business, but had it lost that business, it would have been a loss of over 51,000 tons a year into the Prairie View facility. That's about $300,000 of revenue to the county. That could not have been replaced. It's not easy for the company to go out and find additional volume to replace that revenue with the current restriction we have in place on the facility. So as those opportunities continue to come up, or those situations continue to come up, and these competitors enter the business, they like to take their volume to their own facility. That's how it works. Allied Waste Republic takes their volume to their own landfills, Waste Management to their own landfills, and Waste Connections to theirs. So what I'm encouraging the county to do is to look at this restriction. It's been in place since the inception of the landfill. The federal government currently holds the lever, if you will, on how much volume can come from outside of the county. I think that's incorrect. I think that control should be placed here at the county. It's your facility. You should control it. You should have the opportunity to manage the volume that comes into the site the way you see fit to meet the needs of your residents and the needs of this county. So I would encourage this executive committee and the county board to undertake the necessary steps to address this issue and move forward with efforts to remove this restriction if it so sees fit. Thank you.
You know, I want to make a comment here. Again, I give a little history lesson. You know, the original contract that we negotiated with Waste Management which we negotiated and was accepted by both parties prior to Congressman Weller, the restrictions on the facility, was that we were always going to control our volume. So the county, we make a determination of how much waste was getting within the assessment area, and then we'd have and sales the base, and we would only allow import into the facility what was exported out of the county. So in other words, if we generated 10 million tons in Will County and we exported 4 million tons outside of our facility, we could import 4 million tons. So there was always a control of, we will never put more waste in the facility than is generated by Will County. I mean, that was the good point. And that would give us a long life on the facility, and would keep it economically viable, because that is a component of this, is that we have to have a facility that's economically viable. And hopefully, you know, what I mean by that is a contributor to the revenue stream of the county. So, you know, in the face of losing funding from the state to Will County, certainly I think that Prairie View takes on a different perspective for me than it once did. It was never about a revenue generator initially. It was basically, at that time, the state and the federal government is going to see every county needs to come up with their own solid waste plan and solution. We did it, most counties did not have their own, but it was to have every county have its own solution. I would suggest this is that I do think personally we should ask for restriction to be lifted. And of course, as Congressman Weller did many years ago, I hear the same rhetoric today. And that is, oh, you want to bring in Chicago garbage, you know. And that's how they scare the feds to back it off, I guess. I don't know. I didn't realize it was that big of an anti-Chicago, but understand, it's restricted. Chances of us taking in, you know, I don't think there's much of a chance of taking Chicago garbage. There may be done outside of a regional area. I mean, there's plenty of suburban areas around us and I don't think it would be that great, actually. Just really, what we're really trying to do here is not have things fall below the level where it's just not economically feasible to run in the facility, and that could happen. So you know, the hauler industry, I mean, I tell you, they're strange birds in the sense of how you treat each other. I mean, it's I've never seen such a competitive, you know, it's like, you know, they'll spend $10 more to go down the road than use a competitor, you know, I mean, when really the Will County owns the facility, and Waste Management is our partner, operating partner. So, but because they're an operating partner, all this will bypass Will County's facility. So, I think we should pursue this. I would ask Dean Olson's up here. Okay. Yeah, I think first we start with the solid waste plan, which you're going to see shortly. I mean, it'll be updated as we're required to. And then you start to establish what those will be on today. And then perhaps then we'd have to go through a legislative process. Suzanne, we'd probably put that over to your committee along with the executive committee handling the solid waste Austin. So that keeps pretty much the majority, a good part of the county board in the loop. Okay, executive's office. Did you want to say something there?
I was just going to add to your history lesson because, you know, as some board members know, we did get that other piece stripped away.
Right.
And the geographic restriction, we're the only landfill in the country that has that restriction for whatever reason, but it was put on a defense bill, so you have to run it through a defense bill to get it to come off. But we did have that on as part of our package we requested when we got the other restriction, the time restriction. And at that time, just as it was going through that process, they said now is not a good time to do the geographic distribution or restrictions, excuse me. But we have a lot of that work, but we just need to update it. And obviously, you're right, it has to be part of the solid waste plan, but we could work back through our federal agenda and include, if we chose, to include that in the future.
I think we should put it back on, Suzanne. I think it's something that this county is going to have to address.
Right.
Now, let me also say this, and I never thought I would say this. If you asked me, I would be making this statement 20 years ago, I'd say absolutely not. But in light of slow revenue growth and so forth, look, this now becomes a more focus or important revenue stream. Even to the point I would say that, and it's just not our facility. I don't know if you have this number to hand, but we also have Laraway, which is exclusively owned by Waste Management. And our revenue from there has been pretty significant. I know that varies a little bit more because it's a special.
Quite a bit more than.
And that facility has no restriction on where it comes from. So we're already taking out of county waste there.
But my point is that particular revenue stream that deals with our solid waste programs is taking on a much larger significance than it was. And I think it is a potential, even expansion of our facilities, let alone getting restrictions. I think that at some point we need to take a hard look to see if our current holdings could support another sell or some expansion in the future. And I wouldn't put that off either. I would kind of just look and see what's there. And here again, it falls back to solid waste. It does fall in the executive branch of government, but we probably need to also take a look at that next. So
just one last point, just a thing to consider is, yes, well, it's solid waste plan, but it also, for our residents who utilize a company that disposes of their waste there, it's more cost effective for them to do it here. If our landfill had closed because of the time restriction, that means they would have had to transport waste further, which would have probably been reflective in higher costs to our residents. So we have probably, or arguably, lower costs because we have a landfill in county as opposed to taking it out to DeKalb or Pontiac or somewhere else because transportation costs. So that's something to consider.
You know what I think also, you know, for the unincorporated areas, which I have lived in for 45 years, actually I think it's 46, I would have. I've been there for most of my life now, I guess I would say. So for the last 46 years, you know, we in the unincorporated areas contract our own garbage. As individuals, we're billed separately. And I have no clue. And waste management doesn't necessarily provide a lot of unincorporated areas. I don't know if they do or don't. You know, I know it's a more expensive proposition. But I'd be interested for solid waste to actually maybe give us unincorporated folks some idea who uses our landfill and who doesn't. Because I wouldn't mind switching services if it meant that it was going to Will County landfill. And I would say that I don't know what the number is, but my guess is as a whole, as a group, the unincorporated area produces quite a bit of waste also. Probably as much or more than any municipality. But they make individual decisions, but part of the decision making could be who uses our landfill and who doesn't. So, yeah, I would ask Dean if he could. I don't think I would do that, but it'd be worth putting out the information, right? And I would also put that information out even to the commercial haulers, which are all part separate. I think that's ought to put some pressure on, maybe on the commercial side, is to say, well, you know, do you want to use our landfill? Do you want to be good? And so even on the commercial side, businesses may make that as part of their decision if we make it available to them. So it's a little pressure on both sides.
We'll do the first time.
But no, that's true. So I do think we should take this off. We'll start with Dean maybe coming to the executive committee. And I think, yeah, he's going to come October. But maybe we're talking about the landfill and a lot of waste that's produced and what it could mean with the import-export kind of concept that we originally agreed about. Okay. No, we need no action. We'll just bring this some stuff. Is there anything else that anybody needs to bring up?
Yeah, we are missing one appointment for the Board of Health, Dr. Lipinski.
Okay, Nick, you want to add that?
It was submitted after the original deadline, but I apologize, I didn't see that it wasn't attached to the agenda, but this is something that...
Somebody make a motion, Judy, you want to make a motion to put
Motion. Second.
motion second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, motion carried. We've been working on that appointment for some time, so that's why we need to bring it forward. And the appointment is a doctor, there's a local working doctor,
He works
St. Joe's.
He lives outside the county, but he's a very high-level physician at St. Joe's Hospital here in Joliet.
And I think it's been a while since we've had a physician from St. Joe's. So I'm glad to see we're getting someone from St. Joe's. It's a great appointment. So, okay, so the motion is second. Anything else? There's really need for executive session today?
Please say no.
No.
Please say that.
I mean, then I'll entertain them. I mean, there is no update on any of the state's attorney's opinion. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
Second.